You know, I'm good. It hasn't been a bad day so far, so I'm hoping that'll continue.
All right. Yeah, before the meeting kicks off, I was just gonna jump in and say hi, and also I'm probably gonna stay muted, and video off for most of the time because unfortunately I'm multitasking this evening. But yeah, thanks so much for hosting, and looking forward to hearing Dennis's presentation. Matt Kleinman and I got to meet with him uh, last fall, so yeah,
Yeah, I'm super excited.
yeah.
Adrian, hello again. It's Dennis Strait.
Yes. Good to see you.
Well, good to hear from you at least. Um, yeah, I'm excited to have a chance to share this tonight.
Great. Glad to have you. Sure. From the Groundwork NRG board will be able to be on the call. Of course, we have a few staff people that's going to be on the call this evening, but greetings from the Groundwork NRG board.
Thank you.
I'm going to give people a couple minutes to come in, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Ricardo. Appreciate you.
No problem, Mr. Hare.
Hi, Rachel.
Hey, Dennis, how's it going?
Good, good.
Good. Thanks for doing this with us tonight.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah,
Looking
great.
forward to the discussion.
Yeah, wonderful. Should be good. Should be good discussion. Ricardo, do you want to share the agenda while people are logging on?
Yeah, let me pull it up real quick.
Thank you.
Can everyone see my the agenda?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's just get started and we'll allow people in as they trickle in. So I was going to say good morning. Wow. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first, I think, ever joint CAB and Groundwork quarterly meeting. So let's go ahead and start introducing ourselves. And for the sake of just, it being easy on everyone, I'm going to call on people. So, Dennis, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is Dennis Strait with Gould Evans. We're a design firm here in Kansas City, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all tonight.
All right. Rachel?
Yeah, Rachel Jefferson, Executive Director of Groundwork Northeast Revitalization Group, member of the Heat Cab support team, and a member of the Heat Cab.
Perfect. Adrienne?
Hi there, Adrienne Showalter Matlock. I'm the president of the Groundwork NRG board, and I also am currently working as a facilitator for the Health Department's CHIP, Safe and Affordable Housing Action Team.
Perfect. Thank you. Dustin?
Hey y'all, Dustin. I am working with Heat Cab with WICO Mutual Aid and now with CHC as well.
Great. Thank you. Sin?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cynthia Isa, and I'm the Economic Development and Sustainability Coordinator at Groundwork NRG.
Thank you. Roy?
Yes, I'm Roy Robinson. Good evening. I work primarily with servicing licks.
All right. Thank you. Brendan?
There it goes. Hi, everybody. I'm Brendan Irving. I'm the youth coordinator and administrator for Groundwork NRG. That's all we're saying. Good evening. Did I already say that? All right, bye.
Thank you. Donna?
Hello and good evening. I am Donna Young, Executive Director of Community Health Council of Wyandotte County, also a member of the Heat Cab support team and a member of the Heat Cab.
Perfect. Amber?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Adams, and I am a member of the Heat Cab.
Thank you. Kim?
Hi, my name is Kim Weaver. I am a member of Heat Cab and also a co-founder of WICO Mutual Aid.
Thank you. Mary?
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Ricketts. I've been an MIA member of Heat Cab, trying to get back on track. I'm also foundation board member of Kansas City Cancer Community College and director of pastoral care at Evangelistic Center.
Perfect. Thank you. Jonathan? You're muted.
There we
Yeah.
go.
There
Yeah,
you go.
gotcha. Jonathan Garing. I am a member of Heat Cab. I also am a instructional coach at Argentine Middle School here in District 500. Glad to be here and healthy.
Perfect. Thank you. They kind of moved around on me. Miss Yvette?
Yvette Cosby, member of the Heat Cab and servicing lips.
Okay. And I don't have your name. It doesn't pop up. But I think I just asked you to unmute. There it is.
Oh, hey, I'm Kim Hewitt, University of Kansas Medical Center. Sorry, in my screen I can see my name, but maybe you guys can't.
And now it pops up for some reason. Like when I would try to hover over your name or like your image, it would like not show your name, and I was like, okay.
Okay.
Thanks
for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Miss Elnora.
Hi. Yes, I tried to get in on the address on the calendar item today, but I couldn't get in. So I've tried this one. So anyway, I'm in now. So good evening, everyone.
Hello. Broderick, you just joined.
Yes, I did.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Roderick Crawford, NBC Community Development Corporation, and friend of all things Community Wyandotte.
All right. Chiquita? Maybe some technical difficulties. Are we missing anyone? I think I got everyone. All right. So before we get started with the presentation, I thought it would be kind of a good idea because I know everyone should be familiar with Groundwork NRG. Donna, would you like to talk a little bit about Heat Cab for those who may not know?
Sure. So Heat Cab is a group of engaged Wyandotte County residents that come together to share information, to have robust discussion on issues that directly affect community and to take action. And so there are a number of community-based, community-led initiatives that have developed from Heat Cab. Heat Cab started in 2017 after the release of the HEAT report. That report is available at wearewyandotte.com. And the report takes a look at the intersection of health outcomes, health inequities, and links to policies such as policies that have driven and shaped neighborhoods over the course of decades, things like redlining and other federal and local state policies that have affected and shaped the way communities look today. That report really zeroes in on Wyandotte County. We released it in November 2016, and the HEAT CAB came together very shortly thereafter, and has been supported by 3 organizations, CHC, NBC, CDC, and Groundwork NRG.
Perfect. I realized I was muted. Thank you. So I think this is a great time to get the presentation started. So just a quick little intro. Our guest speaker today will be Dennis Strait. Dennis Strait is an architect and landscape architect and the managing principal of the Kansas City studio of Gould Evans, a nationally recognized planning and design firm. Since 2018, Gould Evans has been working to raise public awareness of how developmental patterns can build value and financial resiliency in our city. Through partnerships with local and professional organizations, the firm and its organization and its associates have developed the ongoing Making a Great City speaker series with the Kansas City Public Library, the Current City We Can All Afford webinar series with the local District Council of the Urban Land Institute and the Kansas City chapter of the Incremental Development Alliance, a national nonprofit coalition of developers helping local communities understand the importance of small infill development projects and the need to make it easier again for everyone to build our cities. So I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Dennis, it's going to be all you. And then if anyone has any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll keep track of the questions, and we'll be sure to have those questions asked at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Ricardo, and good evening, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion tonight. There is a presentation I'm going to go through. It's about 35 or 40 minutes, but the most interesting part will be the conversation we can have afterwards. Rachel, a few months ago, it seems like now, but COVID time is totally different than any other time we're used to. But I'll say recently, Rachel agreed to be on our webinar series that the Urban Land Institute is running. and that's how we met. And eventually, that's how I got to be invited tonight to have this discussion. We, like Ricardo mentioned, we've been sharing presentations and helping to host discussions around town to help our community understand, in many ways, the economics of city building. Because when we stop and look at it, it gives us a new way of understanding our city, and it helps to clarify a lot of misperceptions that we have about how we have either created value or not created value over the last 70 years in particular. So we started the speaker series back in 2018, and we've had 10 installments of that series. It got sidelined a little bit because of COVID. Back in October of last year, we started this presentation as a more Kansas City, Missouri centric explanation of how all these things work or don't. And we're into the 40s now in terms of the number of groups like yours that we've had a chance to present with. We're hoping to continue having these discussions until we get to a different way of valuing the way that we grow our cities, and hopefully a different way of governing the way that we guide our development. So I'm going to jump into the presentation. This is a Kansas City, Missouri centric presentation. We've given it to other communities like Independence and Lawrence, Kansas, and I'm going up to Sioux Falls, South Dakota here later in the month, because it's relevant to all cities. The point is that the way that we've developed over the last 70 years has been different. And it applies to any city that's been doing this for the last 70 years, and that's most cities in the United States. So let me get this started here. Hopefully you all will see a presentation here in just a moment. It's an orange screen in front of you. Okay, good. All right, so there's a number of kind of introductory 101 kind of courses embedded in this. But one of the things that we've been encouraging people to think about in terms of our Kansas City, Missouri, is that in many ways, a city is a very large property management corporation. And if you look at Kansas City, Missouri in that regard, it's the largest corporation in this region because of all the assets that it manages. So that $28.94 billion is the value of all the private real estate that is within Kansas City, Missouri. And in many ways, what a city does is they manage the infrastructure, the public services, all the things that we need to be a city that allows for all these private investments to work together. But we don't necessarily think about ourselves as asset managers in terms of how we think about running our city. And in many ways, that's something that we need to do more of, because then we'll start thinking about managing value where we're creating it and not where we think it might be. So it's a more data-based approach is what we're advocating. This is a map that shows Kansas City, Missouri in a new way. And I'll come back to this, but this is a value per acre map that is a different way of understanding how cities create value. And this is central to the discussion. And again, we'll come back to that later on. This is the first 101 course. This is the introductory course to city building. And it's about 3 slides long. But the point is that human beings have been building cities for about 5,000 years. Some people say 8,000, but say around 5,000 years, we've been in the business of building places where people come together to share commerce, to share a lot of things. And if you look across the globe and you look at a variety of different cultures and situations, you'll find that we started to reach similar conclusions in terms of how do you build places for a wide variety of people to come together. So these city patterns start to evolve and become pretty common throughout cities again all across the world. And if you track Kansas City, Missouri, you can see how we learned from that and how we benefited from that 5,000 years of trial and error. This is an engraving from 1850 that shows the original settlement of Kansas City, Missouri down on the Missouri River back when there was a few thousand people who were starting to form a city there. And within 80 years, which is a lifetime for the most part, within 80 years, we built a full-fledged city. So this is the photo from the 1930s that shows our downtown street life. It shows the significance in the private investment that shows, you know, how lively the street scene was, how active our downtown was. If you back off from that, you can see that within 80 years, we went from being a little village into a full-fledged city with a respectable skyline and a pretty impressive welcome center in the form of the the Union Station building. Kansas City is pretty well known for its parks and boulevard system, and that's unique to Kansas City, Missouri, as it gave the city a urban design framework to build from. So many people now think of Kansas City in terms of its parks and boulevards as the shape that, or the image we draw when we think about Kansas City. What most people have forgotten about is that by 1930, we'd also built this yellow network of streetcar lines. So these streetcars were totaled around 100 miles of track that allowed for all those things I just said to happen. So along with the 5,000 years of city building, we learned that in order to have places where people can share a lot of things, share commerce or share amenities, that you needed public transportation. You needed a way of allowing people to move around to get across all these different areas of the city and communities. And we naturally just followed that pattern and built 100 miles of streetcar. Now, we know we've got just over 2 miles of streetcar today, and we know the major struggle that it took us to build that in our downtown area. And it came naturally with the way that we built the city between 1850 and 1930. It wasn't a big debate or decision, it was just how you built cities. And I want to point out while we're on this map that, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but the Kaw River is right here. Here's the Missouri River. So the Northeast is also served by that same streetcar system. And it's important because this part of Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas developed in such a way that it can be very productive, and I'll come back to that. So that was the city building lesson. There won't be a test, but that was the few points I wanted to make about a city building lesson. Now I'm going to start talking about a civics lesson, because another aspect of city building in the United States is that we've always had a built-in bias towards property ownership. So this goes all the way back to the founding of the country. Our country is based on the notion that each individual is responsible for the governance of the country. That's our democratic form of governance. And it's never really been done, and it's debatable whether it's being done today, right? But that's how we are set up. And the founding fathers knew that was an experiment, and they felt like that for our country to be successful, that the more people were property owners, the more likely they'd be independent minded and they'd manage an independent form of government, which ours is supposed to be. So there were baked in incentives early on to encourage people to be property owners. The way that the railroads expanded across the country, the Homesteading Act, if you're familiar with that, in the 1800s or 1900s, which allowed for people to acquire land through, putting labor into it for 3 years. There are a number of things that encouraged property ownership. And we got into the 1900s, and at that point, the majority of us still did not own their own home. The majority of us still rented homes. So to continue down that policy of encouraging property ownership, the government created the 30-year mortgage program. Not everybody knows that, but the 30-year mortgage was not something banks came up with. It was something our government came up with. And up until that time, you had to be able to qualify for a 5 or 10-year mortgage, which was very expensive, and it kept most people from affording a home. But when we had the 30-year mortgage, that changed. And then we had the end of the Second World War, which created the largest housing market that we've ever seen in terms of the baby boom. We also decided we needed an interstate highway system, which created access to land in a way that our cities had not seen before. So all these things were starting to line up. And something happened in the middle of 1950. And what that is that we had a major disruption of the way we built cities. And that disruption was caused by these things, because by 1950, most American families had one of these. Now I'm going to put a caveat into the discussion that we'll come back to at some point. But everything I've just talked about, all these biases towards property ownership, they're all biased towards the majority of us. And we'll talk about the implications of that and the other side of the coin as we go through this discussion tonight. But this introductory piece is just pointing out all the things that caused us to build the way that we did. Because when we all had cars, when most of us had cars by 1950, it changed the governor, if you will, for how we built cities. So prior to 1950, it was important for us to all be close together. That was the driving factor behind city building. So being close to work, being close to school, having your home close to where you could go to a local grocer so you could carry home a bag of groceries. All those things were important for city building. But by 1950, once we had one of these to get around in, close changed, because you could now drive 15 miles in 15 minutes, and proximity wasn't the same challenge that it had been for city builders up until that time. So you can see what that did to Kansas City, Missouri. This map shows what happened between 1850, when we were that village on the river, to 1950, 100 years later, when we were still that bustling city with the 100 miles of streetcar. Within that first 100 years, we went from a few square miles down on the Missouri River to an 81 square mile city. We went from a few thousand residents to 500,000 residents within that first 100 years. This fast forwards now from 1950 to today, and it shows how much we grew the city. So because we had this new way of getting around and being close together wasn't as important anymore, and we had highways to let us move out and acquire and have access to inexpensive land, we went with it, right? Because we had all these baked-in motivations to become homeowners. We went with that, and the city quickly grew to be an area that was 4 times larger, almost 320 square miles. For a lot of reasons, we didn't grow our population the same way. And in many ways, our population is flat. We're about the same number of people in Kansas City, Missouri today that we were 70 years ago. So the quick math will tell you that every Kansas Citian today has 4 times as much city they have to take care of than a Kansas Citian did in 1950, just because of the way that we grew and all the city that we built. When you go through and you measure up the way that we build infrastructure today, in terms of how wide we make our streets, how thick we make our pavement sections, how we design fire protection in terms of fire hydrants, how we not only have sewer lines, but we even pump our sewage if we have to, because you have to go uphill to develop a certain part of the town. All those things make it more expensive for the way that we build infrastructure. And in many cities, when you do these kinds of studies, you find that it's not 4 times as much city, but it's as much as 10 times as much city per person that we now have to maintain in order to afford the city that we built, which is why we can't afford the cities that we built, which is where this is going, which is why we have trouble every year when it comes to the annual budgeting process in the city, and we can't find all the money that we need to take care of our fundamental infrastructure maintenance and other things that we'd like to think would just be basic necessities. So I'm going to use streets to illustrate this point. So in Kansas City, Missouri, if you measure up all the streets that we built throughout the last 170 years, you'll find that we have 6,400 lane miles of street, which means you can pave a lane of Kansas City starting in New York City, and you can pave all the way across the country. Then you can turn around and pave a lane all the way back and still have enough street left over to pave up to Portland, Maine and back to New York City. And now you've built the street system in Kansas City, Missouri, which is almost impossible to imagine all that street is coiled up and setting within our 320 square miles, but it is. And that's how much street we have to take care of. You can put a price tag on how much it might cost us if we got a good deal to build all those streets today, and it's about $5 billion. And if you talk with civil engineers, they'll tell you that a street will last 50 years if you take care of it. So if you factor out that over 50 years, we have to save enough money to replace those streets, we need to be setting aside about $100 million a year for the street replacement cost in Kansas City, Missouri. That's how much we should be budgeting to take care of our street system. Now it'll survive for 50 years if we take care of it. So we also need to add another $26 million a year to that equation so that we're putting aside enough money every year to afford the street system that we have, which is about $124 million in a quick estimate on what it would take to take care of our current street system. So our Public Works Department, they monitor our streets, they monitor the condition of our streets, and last year they told the City Council that that we actually need $166 million a year to take care of our street system, because the math I just showed you was based on building it all new, and our streets are not new, and many of them go back 50, 75 years old. So the condition of our streets is varied, but if you read the Public Works report, you'll find that the condition of our streets in Kansas City, Missouri is either failed or poor for almost half of our streets. And $166 million would get us to a point of being, we'd get our streets back to a fair condition, not a good condition or a great condition, just a fair condition. Now, they pointed this out to the City Council, but at the same time, they requested a budget of $16 million for last year's street maintenance budget. Now, they knew we needed 10 times that much, but they also knew they couldn't request $166 million because in 2018, they got 12 million, and in 2017, they got 11. And getting 16 was a windfall, right? Because they're competing with all the other needs in our city, and that's just the reality of it. So they know, and we don't think about it enough, but they know that we're only funding about a tenth of what we need to take care of our streets in Kansas City, Missouri. So another way of looking at that, now looking at it in the way that we built our cities over the last 70 years, and I'm going to use a typical neighborhood. If you add up all the streets in this typical neighborhood and you apportion the amount of street needed to get to each home, then you can calculate in this case that every home needs about 136 linear feet of street. Then if you use the same math that we just went through, you'll find that each home needs to be generating about $657 a year to pay for its part of the street network. Now, if you go through the way our property taxes work, you'll find that in this case, a $250,000 home, and the way that we tax it and the way that we budget our taxes, that $250,000 home generates about $94 that is spent on our street maintenance. The $94 is about a seventh of what it needs. So this particular way of city building doesn't generate nearly enough tax returns to support itself. Just by that quick math. Now I'll show a different style of residential building, of residential communities. This is a very urban situation. This is a condominium building that has 14 homes in it. Because it's an urban situation, it only needs about 50 feet of street to support it because it shares streets with all the urban development around it. So in that case, the efficiency is dramatically higher. The example on the left is 37 times more efficient in terms of street use than the example on the right that we just went through. However, the way that we tax ourselves in terms of property taxes, it just assumes that a $250,000 home is a $250,000 home, regardless of what style of neighborhood it sits in. So in an urban neighborhood, we're paying the same taxes as we are in a more suburban neighborhood. So in both cases, we're netting about $94 a year, but the difference is that in an urban setting, the efficiency is so much higher that there's actually money left over from every homeowner in that condominium building that the city can use for other things, because it's so efficient of a development model that it creates good back to the city that again, city can use for other purposes. On the right-hand side, that's not the case. We talked about how because of the amount of streets relative to the number of homes, that it actually is losing money every year. And we don't think about our cities that way, or our neighborhoods that way. Now, you could argue that I just made an extreme comparison, and I did in many ways. I compared a suburban situation to a very urban situation. But I can also make a comparison between the way we built neighborhoods since 1950 to the way that we built neighborhoods prior to 1950. This example on the left is a pre-1950 Kansas City, Missouri neighborhood. And in many ways, a suburban neighborhood, because this is how we built in a suburban way prior to 1950. And you can see just the way we built prior to 1950 was still motivated by this idea of being close together. So since we were trying to be close together, we built our street network in a much tighter grid. We had smaller lots because we could have more homes per acre and get more people together in a tighter fashion. So the way we used to lay out our neighborhoods was at least 3 times more efficient than the way we've been laying out neighborhoods for the last 70 years. But that's not all, because there's another important difference in how we used to build neighborhoods. And that includes these examples. So prior to 1950, it was very common for neighborhoods to be more than just single family homes. We would, you would have a duplex, you would have a triplex, or you'd have some of these, and we're very familiar with these throughout Kansas City, these sixplex colonnade buildings that are still fairly small scale buildings that fit fairly well within a neighborhood setting, but they change the efficiency of land use dramatically, because now you get so many more people living within that neighborhood that the efficiency is dramatically different than the way we build neighborhoods today, which we don't really think about it anymore. We think that the way we build neighborhoods today is a good way to build neighborhoods, but it's a very inefficient way to build neighborhoods. So if you go through the $250,000 home example and look at the post-1950 and the pre-1950 examples, you see that the amount of private real estate investment that you could create on a per acre basis on the left-hand side is dramatically different than the amount of private real estate investment that you generate on the right-hand side of this equation. And that's important because the way we measure property taxes is affected by the property value. So in this case, the property return on investment, if you want to think about the city running a business and their return is in the form of property taxes, in this example, the left-hand side is a win-win, right? Whereas the right-hand side is really a losing proposition. What's interesting is when you start understanding your city from an efficiency perspective in terms of the way you're using your land, pay attention, I'm going to make a very slight change on this slide. I'm going to take the $250,000 home on the left, and I'm going to change the average home value to $50,000. And what you find is that on a per acre basis, those inner city neighborhoods, those historic neighborhoods within the 1950 areas of Kansas City, are as valuable on a per acre basis as the new neighborhoods that we built for the last 70 years, because they're so much more efficient that even though the home values may be significantly lower, the amount of investment the city is realizing that creates property taxes back to the city is so much more efficient that it's actually as beneficial to the city as the newer neighborhoods. And we don't think about our communities that way. So that's where I finally get back to this map that I introduced at the beginning. This is a value per acre map that a group called Urban 3 out of Asheville, North Carolina did for the Kauffman Foundation. Last year, as we all started hearing about opportunity zones, the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, their Urban Neighborhood Initiative, Diane Cleaver, and the Kauffman Foundation were concerned about what this new funding source from the federal government was going to do to our neighborhoods that were identified as opportunity zones. And they thought it would be helpful to have Urban 3 do this study for us. So they actually did this value per acre study for Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas, so we could understand where the value was in our cities. So what this map shows is it's a heat map. So the purple colors are very high values and the green, dark green colors are low values. And you can see that it gradates from the perimeter of the city towards the center where it becomes warmer in color. This is also a three-dimensional map. So the map shows value in terms of spikes where you have high return and value that's flat where you have low return. So the green areas again are fairly flat, and you can see the spikes popping up in the downtown area in Kansas City, Missouri. So the reason this is a different way of understanding your city is because we're used to understanding cities on a per parcel basis. Back to my example of the urban condominium versus the suburban home. You know, if that's a $250,000 home, that's how we think of it. You know, that's a $250,000 value. So the difference is when you measure it on a per acre basis, you get a better understanding of the return that's generated by that investment back to the city. So this is a per acre version of measuring a city, and this is a per parcel version of measuring the city. And you can see the colors change dramatically from one to the other. And you can start to clearly see that there's this warm tone there in that center part of Kansas City, Missouri, and it gradates out to these green colors that are lighter and less valuable if you understand it from a value per acre basis. So I'll explain the difference. Back to our $250,000 home. If that home is on a 1/4 acre lot, then you could build 4 of those $250,000 homes on an acre of land in your city. And you've created $1 million worth of value. And then you can get the tax benefit on $1 million worth of value out of that style of home. Now you could take that same $250,000 home and put it on a 5-acre lot. And we have a whole bunch of these in our metro. All of a sudden that $250,000 home is only worth $50,000 per acre. So did you follow the difference there? We just got a return of $50,000 per acre on a very low intensity land use compared to $1 million per acre on a more efficient land use. And that more efficient land use is what we haven't been paying attention to enough as we've been building our cities for the last 70 years. And these maps help us understand the outcome of that. And that's why we're trying to help our community understand this different way of seeing your city, because it gives you a different way of seeing how you build value and where you might want to make investments. So use that same color coding system. The examples we looked at before, on the right-hand side, it's a fairly low value. And on the left-hand side, it's one of those approaching purple color land uses because it's so high value. And even our pre and post 1950 neighborhoods, you can see they're about a similar value if we have a $250,000 home on the right-hand side and a $50,000 home average on the left-hand side. So then the question comes up, well, now that you can start to understand your cities this way and what we've done to ourselves over the last 70 years, what should we be doing differently? So the first question is, now that we know that we've built so much city that we at least have 4 times as much city per person that we have to try and take care of, that's illustrated by this map. um, shouldn't we be very careful about building any more streets? Because every additional street that we build just adds to the maintenance budget, adds to the burden, adds to our liabilities, adds to those things that we've got to take care of. And we've already figured out that we don't have nearly enough tax revenue to take care of what we've built. So we should be really careful about building any more. But unfortunately, building new neighborhoods is still the primary way that we grow our city. Even though that the math I just showed you shows that every new neighborhood really loses money over the long term for a city, we keep building that way because we have a misunderstanding of how we generate value. Now, it doesn't say that you should just stop building new, but it does say that we should be very careful about when we decide to build new and to make sure that we're building it in an efficient way that has some potential for generating enough revenue back to the city so that you can afford to take care of it. We haven't built that way for generations now. An interesting thing about that is if you look at the way we built cities, you would want to get much more value into that neighborhood on the right. So now that we understand this different way of seeing your city, there is this opportunity to grow the return on investment. So this is the budget pie for Kansas City, Missouri in 2019 and 2020. And it shows in that red sliver the amount of money put aside for street preservation. And it shows that if we really had the money we needed, we'd have to grab $140 million from somebody else. And if any of you have served on a city council, you know that that's not easy because you're taking away from something significant in order to amass that much money. So the likelihood of us being able to do that is very low. But on the other hand, now that we understand how we create value in our cities, we could grow the amount of return on investment if we pay attention to the way that we continue to grow. So back to our examples of the two suburban neighborhoods, pre-1950 and post-1950. On the right-hand side of this equation, it's going to be very difficult for those $250,000 homes to double in value. It's very unlikely that's going to happen. On the left-hand side of this equation, those $50,000 homes are well below the average value in Kansas City, Missouri. And it's reasonable to think that you could increase the value of those homes. But in all cases, you could increase the value if you would accept that one of the ways we used to build value in our neighborhoods was building more than just single family. These are examples of multifamily housing. And they're not at all the picture that people have in their minds when you say multifamily housing. But this is multifamily housing, and it's the scale of multifamily housing we used to build all the time. There's townhomes on the upper right. There's a duplex building that looks like a house on the lower right. In fact, all these look like houses because they effectively are residential scale buildings. But they're very efficient residential scale buildings that allow our neighborhoods to be much more efficient. And they also allow us to provide a much broader range of housing options in our neighborhoods than single family only neighborhoods can provide. So even in our post-1950 neighborhoods, we need to have a different attitude about multifamily housing, because that's one of the ways that we're going to start to build those neighborhoods out of the hole that they're in terms of being expensive to maintain because there's so little return on investment in terms of the land use. If we can increase the land use by making more efficient use of it with investments like these, you can make those neighborhoods more valuable. So the other problem that we need to take on is that I mentioned the $250,000 home in the urban condition versus the suburban condition. It doesn't matter. There's no benefit back to the city which way you choose to build. You get charged the same as a homeowner in Kansas City, Missouri, and it's a function of not really thinking about the cost of that style of development. So the one thing we don't do is that we don't think about the fact that if you choose to live 10 miles outside of the center of town or even 4 miles outside the center of town, your choice of living is requiring a much higher use of the street system than if you choose to live closer in. So there ought to be some cost for that we all bear based on our housing choices, but we don't. Presently, if you live in that $250,000 home anywhere in this map, you pay the same property taxes, and it's not equitable because of the amount of, again, street system that you need to support your lifestyle choice. This issue with property taxes is also the reason why in some of our most valuable areas, like this part of downtown Kansas City, Missouri, we have some of the least valuable development. So this very sophisticated bar chart I drew here shows how we deal with property taxes. Our property taxes are based on the value of the improvements. That's like 80 or 90% of our property taxes, whereas the location, the land value, is only 10 to 20% of our property taxes. So because of the way we've structured valuation and the way that we charge people property taxes, if you're a downtown property owner and you think your property is going to grow in value over the next 20 years, you might want to keep it undeveloped and only have a parking lot on it because you're going to only pay a very little amount of taxes because you don't have any improvements to speak of. So your holding cost for that investment is very low. And in reality, because of the way we tax each other in terms of property taxes based on improvements rather than location, we encourage people to not invest in our most valuable parts of our city. And that's why we have parking lots in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Again, the most valuable acreage in the city has parking lots, which is a very low return on investment. So all these areas are underperforming for what we as Kansas Cityans ought to be worried about, ought to be thinking about, because the value of those yellow parcels is the result of 170 years of Kansas Cityans building their city. And the highest value part of that investment is right here, but it's being squandered because of the way that primarily because of the way that our property taxes don't encourage people to develop. They encourage people to hold property. If we flip that equation around and we made the primary charge for property taxes to be based on location rather than improvements, then all of a sudden all these yellow properties would be motivated to get some return on investment. They'd be motivated to do something with that property other than just put a parking lot on it, because they would need revenue to pay for that property tax. See, it changes the motivation. And right, it doesn't change the amount of total tax that's being charged. It just changes the motivation that we would charge for downtown properties. So this same phenomenon also explains on the right-hand side why we have disinvestment happening in our neighborhoods through absentee landlords, because the same phenomenon encourages people to buy a property and then just let it fall apart, because then the improvement value goes very low and you're not paying much for the land value. So you can afford to hold on to it indefinitely until maybe that neighborhood comes back to life. But in the meantime, you're driving the value of that neighborhood down because you're not maintaining your property. And that is in large part encouraged by our property taxation system. So it's a complicated issue that we need to take on in the community to actually start creating taxes that motivate productive behavior, so that we don't motivate speculative behavior, which is what I just described. So there are three different things we're recommending. Be very careful before we build any more new infrastructure, because it's costing us so much. And then let's make really good use of the infrastructure that we have. That's the second recommendation. By encouraging infill and encouraging productive use within our neighborhoods in ways that'll help our neighborhoods be more productive. And then the third recommendation is that we really need to confront our property taxation problem and make it something that, again, encourages good behavior, encourages good use of our urban land. Now, I've talked about streets for most of this because it's an easier thing to understand if we just talk about streets and the value we've created or not, and how that's reflected by our development patterns. But I'm going to also talk about public safety for a moment. A few years ago, when Sly James was the mayor, he had a public debate with one of the police commissioners the police commissioner said, I need more money. And Sly James said, you get plenty of money. And the truth is both were right, but they had different perspectives. So on the left is Mayor James' perspective, and it shows how much Kansas City, when you compare us to other cities about our size around the country, how much we spend on a per capita basis for police protection. And you can see that we do pretty well. We're up in the top 3 cities in terms of how much we invest in police protection based on per capita. But on the right-hand side is the police commissioner's perspective. And this is measuring how much we invest in police based on a square mile basis, because we've got a spread out city that we need to take care of the entire city. And you see we don't rank as well because we've spread out so much that it's much more costly to maintain and to service a city like we built over the last 70 years. So I've talked about this value per acre. I can point out that when you study this map, you see in Kansas City, Missouri, that there's an economic engine. The most valuable part of Kansas City, Missouri is this area I outlined in yellow. This is about 5% of Kansas City, Missouri. That sits within the area bounded by the Missouri River on the north and 75th Street on the south, a state line on the west, and then Troost Avenue on the east. Again, I describe that as the economic engine for the city because it's the most valuable land in the city. It generates the most revenue back to the city of any other part of the city. That 5% of Kansas City generates 20% of the city's value. And you can see the tones there, the warm tones, and you can see the purple spikes. So that's a very productive part of our city. Cities always used to have a very productive, very valuable downtown and a not so valuable perimeter. That was a pretty natural way the cities got built. What's unnatural is to have so much less valuable perimeter, so much of the green that our books are out of balance. We've got a very high productive 20%, but a very low productive, a very high productive 5%, but a very low productive 95%. And that's why we're upside down in terms of our taxation. But let me get into another piece of this. This is zooming in on that value per acre map. And again, this is a 3-dimensional map and a color-coded map. And now we're looking right in towards Midtown with the center of this image being Troost Avenue. So you can see that on the left-hand side of the slide, there's this warm tones and the higher spikes. And on the right-hand side, there's the green tones and it's fairly flat as a measure of property value. There's no reason why that should be. There's no natural reason why that should be. This is the third quick primer. This is our real estate course. This is everything you need to know about real estate, in a nutshell, that the value of real estate is based on location. And we've all heard that, location, 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 and it's generally true that that's what drives up the value of a piece of property. So why in the world, in our city where we can see this yellow dashed in area, that's our economic engine, why in the world would the value drop dramatically on one side or other, that just a line in our city? Because the location, location, location principle doesn't explain that at all. But this map does explain that. So this is a red line map that all cities have. And this map essentially shows the what we can now see as the outcomes of disinvestment in our cities due to a governmental policy that was created at the same time back in the early 1900s that we created the opportunity for more home ownership through a 30-year mortgage for the majority of us. But at the exact same time that we created that, we created these maps that said, well, you can't use that 30-year mortgage in areas that are redlined, and you shouldn't use it in yellow areas, and you have to think hard about blue areas, and green areas are okay. But you can see what that happened, what that did. It caused disinvestment in all those red areas and yellow areas because you couldn't benefit from the same 30-year mortgage. So in effect, our government created a policy that encouraged and subsidized many of us to become property owners. But at the same time, they created restrictions that restricted particularly our African American communities, from participating in that same new way of building wealth. So a real estate development practice caused a lot of the disparity that we have in our world today, that we're now talking about, is now front of mind in most cases. In fact, if you go back through our social studies discussion, at the same time that there are all these incentives built into our laws and practices that encourage the majority to become property owners, there were restrictions that kept, again, the minorities, but particularly African Americans, from participating in that same process of wealth building and property ownership. Richard Rothstein's outlined 15 different examples of government policies or real estate regulations that caused that to happen. So it's an injustice that's well documented, that we can't ignore, because it's true. It's a reality that caused this to happen. But the good news is we are now talking about that. We're now recognizing why this disparity occurred, and that we should do something about it. We should allow for those communities to thrive just like the communities that have thrived over the last 70 years. So at least on the Kansas City, Missouri side of the equation, we're encouraging that you ought to look at this situation and recognize that on the left-hand side of the ledger, there's disinvestment still. And the value per acre is going to change. It's already changing in a lot of ways because there's already reinvestment happening. But there's an opportunity for it to be thought of as an opportunity. So those neighborhoods on the left-hand side could easily become $150,000 homes. I mentioned before, those neighborhoods on the right-hand side are very unlikely to become $500,000 homes. But on the left-hand side, it's easy to imagine, because there's already neighborhoods east of Truce in Kansas City, Missouri, that have risen to that level of property value. And it's easy to imagine that that's going to continue to happen. And while that's happening, it's going to be good in terms of, we're going to get much better return on investment back to the city in terms of property taxes. So that's going to be a windfall for the city. But if we're not careful about how it happens, if we don't give some thought to the policies for how we manage that phenomenon from happening, we're going to have all the negative sides that we hear about from gentrification in terms of displacement, and not allowing current communities to benefit from that new investment and from that wealth building. And it's already an issue. This is already something that Kansas City, Missouri needs to be addressing today, that we're not. Because that could happen. We could dramatically increase, or see increases in property values, and we could miss the opportunity for this time for those communities to benefit from that wealth building and to participate in that wealth building. But it does mean that we need to be thoughtful about how it happens, because the current market forces wouldn't necessarily take that into account. Now, I mentioned before that when the Urban 3 and the Kauffman Foundation did these studies, they studied value per acre for both Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas. So we have that information to work with. And we have that new way of understanding the city recorded, and as a tool that your community can use to help explain the Kansas City, Missouri story I just said, but on the Kansas City, Kansas side of the line. We have the same patterns throughout the Northeast area that I described on the east of Truce areas because of the redlining phenomenon. That's why we had disinvestment. It's really frustrating to know that had we not had redlining, that we wouldn't have the disinvestment we have throughout our city, because there is no reason why those neighborhoods wouldn't have continued to invest just like the rest of the city did. And they would have continued to been healthy neighborhoods, but we restricted them from participating in that investment that the 30-year mortgage created over the last 70 years. So we can see that, and we ought to deal with that and confront it as we go through the next 50 and 70 years in a way that's much more equitable and is much more fair across the equation. So I'm going to jump out of this. I've talked enough. I'm hoping we can have a discussion about some of these things and see how this story about Kansas City, Missouri might apply to Kansas City, Kansas, and to all of us as we go forward. So thank you for listening to all that. And let me get us back to a screen here. Ricardo, do you want to look for questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for presenting. So I was looking through, there was a few comments, not really questions. So maybe people are holding those to now, but Rachel mentioned that it seems like the same would apply in terms of climate impacts, which is another lens to look at through in terms of efficiency that could be measured in health impacts in addition to money spent on fuel, etc. I think it was during the expansion, like where the city is expanding, and you were talking about how the further away you live, the more you have to travel, the more you have to use the roads.
Right.
And then Eric mentioned that this was a great presentation, but I don't know if anyone else has any other questions that they were holding on to. So since they're not in the chat, if anyone wants to ask a question, feel free and just unmute yourself and ask that question.
I have a question. This is Adrienne.
Hi, Adrienne.
I was just wondering, we're kind of in the middle of another big shift in terms of like how housing is owned, in terms of there's been like a very big increase in the financialization of housing. So it's not just that there's a lot of privately owned housing, but also the mortgages being sold and resold like on the secondary market is becoming a huge place for investment, like instead of say in the stock market.
Right.
So it seems like there's really a sort of ballooning amount of investors who are putting their money into land. And I'm just wondering how you see that as, to me, it seems like it would be a barrier to sort of designing cities in the way that will both like increase the value of the land and also, like you're talking about, and also prevent gentrification.
It's certainly going to continue to make our cities less affordable. And it's going to probably continue to happen. And it's an economic discussion rather than what I've talked about thus far. It has to do with there aren't many good places to put money anymore. Stocks aren't really worth what we say they're worth, what the market says they're worth. The dollar's not really worth what we think it's worth. And so people are recognizing that land's a fairly safe investment. So more and more people are investing in land. That's happening. And unfortunately, you can see why that's happening because of just the way the economy works. So you're right. That's another reason to be concerned about how we're going to deal with housing affordability and how we're going to deal with that phenomenon in a fair way. That deserves more study. I can't give you an answer about property taxes or any other form of trying to offset that. But we ought to be worried about that because the one thing that we benefit from here in the Midwest is that we don't have San Francisco's problem. We don't have Portland's problem. We don't have Austin's problem. We don't have Denver's problem or Nashville's problem. And that problem is they've already seen dramatic inflation in their property values to the point that they're really going to struggle to truly find a way of having housing accessibility across a variety of wage levels. That ship has sailed for those cities. That ship has not yet sailed for Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas. Now, we do have affordability and accessibility problems, but we don't have near the kind of problems that those cities have because of the inflation that's already happened. Our cities are still fairly affordable. But we need to act now, right? We need to get on top of this now to take advantage of that affordability for our city, for our citizens, for ourselves, before outside investors or any investors start to take it away. So all I can do is just kind of raise the concern about that. I can't offer an answer to it other than there is an urgency there that you're underlining, Adrian. And I really don't know how you can stop that. But we ought to be looking at ways that we can offset it if we can.
Dennis Broderick, thank you so much for your presentation, and it lines up very nicely with several of us who provide a heat presentation that we often give. My question to you is, so many of us on this call are in line and agree with what you have provided. My question is, how do we get the power players in the greater metropolitan Kansas City area on board, or at least in line or aware of what you just said? One of the things that we bring out in our PowerPoint that you didn't mention is that the key broker of redlining was J.C. Nichols. And so how do we properly inform the constituents that are in power, whether that's Kansas City, Missouri, Independence, Lee Summit, Overland Park, Johnson County, etc., to what has really been in place as a racist process in our area? Flat, it is a racist process that has been put in place and now has been born on the backs of people of color. So as we have right now in this climate, this issue of social injustice, and those that look more like you than look like me, when they say, well, why does it, we're heading right? No, here it is in black and white. How do we inform those folks to be understanding of, this wasn't something we created, but this is something we have to bear?
So that's part of what we're hoping to do with this presentation and with this way of understanding your city. Too much of our public policy is driven by emotions and perceptions as opposed to reality. The value that we talked about in urban neighborhoods compared to the value in suburban neighborhoods is not how we understand it, right? We think that those new suburban neighborhoods are paying for the rest of us, right? But when you understand the data, you start to see that's not the case. And you also start to see that efficiency of land use is good for the city. It creates value back to the city. And there's good reason to be investing and caring for those areas that were built prior to 1950, because they were built in a very efficient way that can be productive back to the city. So that's just one line of discussions. Rachel's point about efficiency in terms of environmental impact and just the amount of infrastructure per capita that we're putting out there every day, those are also measurable data points that we should be talking more about. We should be measuring the cost of cities based on facts, not based on impressions or ways of doing business. And I don't know any better way to confront this than to have more fact-based discussions and fact-based policies for how we're going to invest in our cities to go forward. So I know that's not a sufficient answer, right? But it's what we're trying to do to help focus on our cities in a different way than we have been. We have seen, in Kansas City, Kansas in particular, I know there are people that are paying attention to this fact-based approach towards city building, this data-based approach towards city building. I know that because when we brought our first speaker to town in 2018 for our speaker series, it was a guy named Chuck Marone, who's a civil engineer up in Minnesota who figured all this out about the value per acre. And he's kind of a celebrity in our planning world, in our geeky planning world. So when we were bringing him to town, we were going to spend the afternoon with him in our studio, our planners, and we were going to have a chance to talk to him and, you know, pick his brain, and that was going to be fun. But I get a call the night before from one of his assistants, and he tells me that, well, Chuck's going to meet you at the library tomorrow night. You don't need to pick him up from the airport because the mayor of Kansas City, Kansas is having him picked up, and they're going to spend the afternoon together. So I was pretty upset because, you know, I planned to have this guy in town and that we were going to have some quality time together. But I soon found out after that Mayor Alvey and Alan House and a couple others had been tracking this same way of understanding your city that we were tracking. And they were wanting to talk with Chuck about how do you use this more data-based approach towards, again, city valuation to help guide policy and help guide investments. And I know they're working that direction. I also know it's got to feel painfully slow. Because the reality in Kansas City, Kansas is much closer to Detroit in terms of the amount of disinvestment. So you have to be almost surgical in terms of your decisions on where to invest, because you can't afford to not be successful. You need every next move that you all take to be as successful as you can be, because the challenge is that significant. The reality is the challenge is very significant in Kansas City, Missouri, but we can't see it yet. So we're not going to be motivated to make a difference on the east side of the state line because we think everything's good. But the reality is the streets are falling apart underneath us, and we're continuing to invest in poor ways in our city. In some ways, the fact that there are people in Kansas City, Kansas already starting to understand this, you're ahead of the game in terms of public policy understanding. Now, it's not changing the world overnight, but we kind of did this to ourselves over the last 70 up to 100 years. So it's not likely going to change overnight. It's going to take change in understanding and a long game view for us to start to build back the value that we've lost and that we've disinvested in. But I really think that it's paying attention to what really happens on the ground, paying attention to where we have opportunities for good reinvestment and where we have productive neighborhoods already, and taking care of those and reinvesting in those, that is going to be the pathway for creating, again, vital neighborhoods.
Dennis, this is Roy Robinson. I have a question for you.
Please.
When you start talking about data, I guess I'm comfortable using data. But if you take people and put them back in the core of the cities and you build all these new lofts, what's going to happen to the people that used to live there that can no longer afford to live there? What do you do with them?
If you don't think about that, then they won't be there, right? The natural market forces will cause displacement. That's what happens with gentrification. That's why that's a concern. So there need to be public policies in place that allow for folks who already live in communities to have a 10 or 20-year runway where they don't see their properties inflate the same way, and they can gradually become accustomed to that increase in property value and participate in that increased property value and in the benefits of that wealth building. There are examples around the country and even in Kansas City, but not enough of policies that allow that to happen. We need better policies, and we need to recognize that's a phenomenon that we've created. The other part about all this math is that when people think about reinvesting in a neighborhood, they immediately go towards, well, I need to build a 4-story apartment building. because the money doesn't work unless I build a 4-story apartment building. I can't afford to build a duplex. I can't afford to build a single family home. It's got to be a 4-story apartment building. And that's because of all the regulations that we put in place that make it expensive to develop in our city. And it's because of this process of regulating to a point that you have to do major projects. It's inflated land values. If we really got to a fact-based approach towards city building, you wouldn't see such dramatic increases in property value all at once. You wouldn't see a 4-story building going into an area that's trying to redevelop. You would see houses and duplexes going back into a neighborhood that's coming back to life. You'd see homes being restored, and you'd see that happening first. That would be a normal way of reinvesting in a city. But for a lot of reasons, we caused ourselves to get to this economy that only encourages big projects that are very disruptive to properties, or we encourage extreme inflation that it causes new homes to be built that displace people. And we need to recognize we created those disparities, we created those undervaluations, and now we need to manage back as we reinvest in those areas so that those communities can participate. And there are ways to do that. We just need to get on top of it. We need to help people understand that's important. So it's a real issue, and it needs real public policy and attention to allow it to happen in a fair way going forward. It won't happen naturally.
This is Eleonora, and I have thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. I need to see it again, and I would imagine, Ricardo, that it's recorded, hopefully so, and that we have access to it. It's just a lot to
I am
with.
The presentation right now, but I believe Dennis has his own recording of the presentation as well.
I do. I've got different versions of it. Tonight's version, I put in the slides for Kansas City, Kansas, but it's generally the same one. So if you don't have the full recording tonight, I can certainly share some other versions of it for you to go back through.
That would be good. One of the questions that I have is, in the older parts of the city, we have the stormwater overflow issue and EPA mandates and so forth. And how does that impact, because I know you talked about streets, but how does that impact the value, a difference between the urban area and the more valuable land and the suburban area where you have the new homes going in? What does that do to the equation?
It should increase the value in the urban areas. Now, I don't understand Kansas City, Kansas well enough to be an authority on this. I'll talk about Kansas City, Missouri, because we have the same consent decree on both sides of the state line. So we are ordered by the federal government to fix the problem that we have, and that problem is that when it storms, our sewer systems, which are both sanitary and storm, they overflow and they put effluent into our community. So now we're trying to build additional capacity in those systems so that they don't overflow, which is an expensive proposition. I've heard numbers north of $5 billion on the Kansas City, Missouri side of the equation. But I've also seen that's a court order. We don't have a choice. We have to invest in that. So that's going to happen regardless of what we want to do or might choose to do. It's going to happen. And unfortunately, we're not being strategic enough with how it does happen. There are some good examples on the Kansas City, Missouri side of the line where we're doing that in a way that builds green infrastructure, it builds parks, it builds amenity, rather than just building sewer lines or pipes that are underground. And that's good because it creates value on the surface that we can all benefit from. But it could be even better because we could align that reinvestment with investment in neighborhoods so that it's helping to bring a neighborhood back. And that's just aligning efforts. It's just recognizing we're going to be making those investments. Let's line that up with reinvestments in our infrastructure, reinvestments in home repair programs, and all sorts of things that could help communities become healthier over time. And since that's money we're going to be spending anyway, we should take good advantage of it. And I hope that's the same story on the Kansas City, Kansas side. We should use that new investment to be strategic about where we're, again, reinvesting in our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Dennis. We're getting close on time here, and so I'm going to ask one last question. It's a question that was put into the chat, but I'm sure that if there's a follow-up, Dennis, I'm sure would make himself available for additional questions at some point in the future. So this question came from Dustin. If we're only funding 10% of street debt per year, how quickly does the problem balloon well beyond 166 million per year? And at what point does it become more affordable to abandon street repair and replace the transportation infrastructure with something completely different? Last question of the evening.
Interesting. It's, at $166 million, it's more than the replacement value already. So, those numbers are pretty similar in that regard. The point about the presentation is that there are efficient ways of building cities, and then there's a way we've been doing it for the last 70 years. That's a very expensive way to build a city, and it's just proven that we can't afford it. And if we learn from our ancestors, 100 years ago even, but over the last 5,000 years, if we learn from those practices of how we used to build cities, to build in a sustainable way, we can move back towards that. Now, you can't really move back towards that in our suburban communities. It's an inefficient, expensive way to inhabit the ground. But even if we rebuilt from scratch our urban neighborhoods, they would be more valuable and they would return more quickly. So that's just a lesson we've learned over, again, all those years of trial and error of city building that we need to pick back up on. And I hope that we will, and I hope that we start doing it soon, because it's going to take us some time. So Dustin, I hope I answered the question, but I would still encourage us to think about efficient ways of building, and we have lots of patterns that we can learn from and go back to that will get us there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, your time this evening to share with us this presentation. I know that I found it interesting in the reframing of the issue. So we really appreciate it. And if you don't mind, sometimes we send out little follow-up emails after the meeting, and perhaps we can include your email in that, Dennis, and if people have additional questions or want to see if you'd be willing to give this presentation at other events.
I was going to make a bargain with you that if you'll help us continue to get the word out and have these discussions more and more around town, I'm more than happy to do whatever we can to answer questions and support it.
Great.
So thank you for this opportunity tonight. I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a great presentation.
Yep.
Thank you.
Ricardo, would you like to take us away?
Yep, I would say everyone clap, but if our birthday singing at the office has shown me anything, is that it gets really awkward. So thank you again very much. So the next item on the agenda are just some quick updates from Groundwork and the heat cab. So Rachel, I'll let your group take the first stab at this.
Hi, everybody. It's Brendan, Groundwork NRG. Few quick updates. I'm going to start kind of more on my area of youth, and we're going to expand out from there, and Rachel will take over. First things first, we wrapped up the summer program. As you well guessed, it was virtual for the first time ever. I think we had a really good experience. We brought on 3 helpers from Workforce Partnership, 3 18-year-old young people that really connected with the youth. We were really able to expand how much time the youth were able to get with, an adult / someone a little close to their age, since I'm apparently too old for the youth, as they told me. So we really worked out. We had Nikki Wells come back once again to be facilitator. So between me, her, and the 3 youth, we had 5, split between 30 youth. We took on 10 more since we were going virtual. It was a pleasure. The kids, I couldn't get them to leave some days. The response was great. They undertook projects to help expand community projects. So they did some Facebook post collages for census, encourage people to take the census, learn about the census, and the kids actually looked up facts and things that census help funds. And so they learned a lot. They did a lot of great work. I had them design the t-shirt this year, really making sure that the kids were engaged. They had a lot to do, keeping talking down, interactions up. Classes were 2 hours, and really making sure that we started at 11 o'clock because kids were still asleep. So just kind of adapting to this changing world. We also had, we will be doing a fall program. We've already kind of done a fall program. We did a mini session with the help of Donna, CHC, Casey Healthy Kids, as kind of a little mini pilot for what we want to do for the youth heat cab. We took on 12 youth. We did just a quick 4 session in a week and a half, 3 days, 1 week, 1 day for kind of a debrief. Kids were great. Kids actually really enjoyed it. We got a lot of positive feedback, a way to refine the process. So hopefully when we go into schools this year, it'll be slimline and really engaging and good for youth, that concentrated on teaching kids how to advocate properly and how to learn about nutrition and the universal meal plan system that would, and as you should all know, in general, allow free lunches for all youth. So you don't have to fill out the paperwork. No one's turned away. We actually had some nutritionists at work at the school tell us that they just, secret guys, they just give out the food anyway because they don't turn kids away. And that is essentially money out the door. They don't get the money back for that. So they actually lose funding every time they feed a youth that hasn't filled out the paperwork. This makes sure our schools get more money and our students get fed. So if you all want to call Pat Roberts or send him a message talking about how much you're in favor of this, please do. He listens. He's a big champion of school lunches, feeding youth. So, you know, keep at it. Let him know that you want that. Even if you're on the Missouri, I don't care if you're on the Missouri side, just call Pat Roberts. It's fine. We'll also be doing a full fall program. We've got funding for that. We're going to take on more youth and do a full fall program. That's probably going to squeak more into the advocacy sector once again. I'm playing around with the idea of how to train youth to actually attend meetings like this and how to join boards and kind of be part of coalitions. We always want youth to be part of those things, but we never train them or give them the confidence and or the, I guess, basic training to help them participate and feel like they are welcomed and confident enough to talk during coalitions, boards, and all that. Moving on, we've done, moving on to the YSAP, our Youth Substance Abuse Prevention. Me and Molly Godabed at CHC have been spearheading that. We've pulled on a new intern. Her name is Haley. She's going to help me. I think we're going to do a project, a little kind of mini project in the fall, learn to earn if it works out, to kind of teach kids advocacy and kind of help them talk about their experiences with various substance, the communities that care survey the youth have to take, and just kind of spearhead that, kind of get the momentum going on that project, since our timeline's kind of been cast off due to COVID once again. These companies have already talked about it. We're still working on a tree planting / mural painting in Jersey Creek Park. A lot of stumbling caps there, once again due to COVID, but things are looking good. It's gonna happen. It's just kind of a question mark of when. We're hoping this fall. Knock on wood. We'll at least get half of this done. I'm getting that mural in that park. No one stopped me. I'll paint it myself. This October, this is the big takeaway I hope you guys all do. The Merc is open up. For those that don't know, Merc is a co-op grocery store, opened up in KCK. It's gotten a lot of positive press. People have called it an enviable grocery store, which I really like. And they talk about the importance of that being in KCK. I've been there multiple times. Everything's great. I really like it. I've probably been there too much. But this October, we're going to be their featured, I guess, community partner. I think it's like Change for Change. And so there's 3 different ways that you can help us I guess, receive funding from the MARC. You can round up your dollar amounts. You can purchase reusable bags. That comes to us. And there's a third way that I have instantly forgotten that I knew a second ago. Rachel, if you remember, please pipe in now. No, there's a third way. We will be out there telling you how to give us money. But I, once again, even before October, stop by the MARC, get a sandwich, get a coffee. It's great. The people there are lovely, and they've been nothing but helpful to our organization. They've donated food. They've just been lights out. We have a new Vista. Our old Vista, Dejan Heinzman, has left us. Her term of service is up. It's very sad, but she's starting school once again. She was actually very sad she couldn't attend tonight because apparently she was very hyped for Dennis's presentation because it kind of falls into her degree. So I might give her this recording. I don't know if she left. I'm heartbroken. We have a new Vista, Jack Vandeleeuw. Just started Monday. He seems great. He's been very helpful. So fingers crossed. He has a big hole to fill. Those are my updates. Rachel?
Yeah, I'm just going to keep it very quick. Thank you so much, Brendan, for those updates and for letting us know about the Learn to Earn program and some of the other things that you've had going on in conjunction with some of our partners here on this call. So as Brendan mentioned, we hired a new community planner and communications coordinator, which is our AmeriCorps Vista position, replacing Dejan. And we are all very sad about that, but she's been a great asset and obviously want her to do well in her future endeavors. So getting back to school is one of those things. We also recently hired a green team coordinator as a part of our transition into the Groundwork USA national network. We had to really fulfill two major tasks. And one was changing our name to Groundwork, what have you. And so for those of you who have been in these meetings for a while, you knew us as the Historic Northeast Midtown Association. We are now Groundwork Northeast Revitalization Group. We also had to start a green team program. So this program is going to be for youth age 17 to 21. So Learn to Earn, as Brendan was talking about, is for youth 12 to 16. This is going to be 17 to 21, working more with that young adult category and environmental conservation, stewardship, construction, and trade skills. And so one of the first steps to getting that program started was to hire a coordinator. I'm very happy that we have hired that coordinator who will be coming on board with us in late September 21st. So very excited about that. We've also went through a hiring process for another candidate for our Jaywalk Walk YCO program. Say that 3 times fast. Basically to get our Friends of Jersey Creek Walk Club and our Parkwood Park Walk Club started again, as well as other walk clubs in the area, and then also run what's similar to like a Parks RX program where doctors and healthcare providers are prescribing walking to community residents and working with students to get people active and walking in the community, obviously socially distant walking in our recreational spaces. So I offered someone that position today, and I hope to have good news on Tuesday that they accepted. And the other thing I want to tell you about is some of you know that back in June, we applied for a Planning Sustainable Places grant from the Mid-America Regional Council for our Heritage Trail and Green Infrastructure project. This is a project that really came out of the Northeast Area Master Plan in terms of honoring the rich history of Northeast KCK. The Heritage Trail is a concept that, you know, by no means its genesis was not found in the Northeast Area Master Plan. We have a lot of people in the community who have been advocating for a heritage trail in their neighborhoods for a long time. And so this is an attempt to secure planning dollars to create a heritage trail route that will stretch from Caw Point, so the eastern front of Northeast KCK, to the Quindaro town site. So east to west, bridging our community and dovetailing into what will be the Quindaro town site trails, and hopefully welcome center and visitor center and historical highlight and jewel of our community, as there are people that are working on that. So we're very excited about the opportunity. Our proposal actually came in second in Kansas and fourth across the region. And so the UG actually had the number 1 and 2 highest ranked proposals for Kansas money, because it's KDOT funds, surface transportation funds that are funneled down to KDOT. So we're very excited about that. We will find out on September 11th if we were in fact able to secure those dollars, in which case we would be creating an RFP in conjunction with the Mid-America Regional Council and the Unified Government to secure a planning firm who would engage in a community-based participatory action research process for this heritage trail. And we'd also be looking for and securing dollars to pay community members well to participate in that process. So those are my two highlights as far as Groundwork Northeast Revitalization Group. I think that Ricardo, we're going to move into some other heat cab updates. Thank you, guys.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you, Brendan and Rachel. And Brendan, FYI, there's a comment in the chat for you specifically. So I'll go down the list. The first one, cab related, is about servicing lips. So quick updates. We are now working with League of Women Voters, Dot Votes, Mainstream Coalition, among other groups, because I think there's another group at least, and I'm forgetting names right now. But we're going to work together to join in a coalition to do candidate forums around some of the races that are going on this year. And so right now we are in the send invitation phase, so we'll be sending those out here pretty shortly. The plan is to have those the forums early to mid-October. I know the U.S. or the House Senate is looking into being somewhere, I think, October 6th, and I think the ones we would be planning would be that second week of October. So once we have those dates 100% figured out and people confirmed, we will be sending out what's the word I'm looking for? Ads so that people can actually join in those forums. And last day to register to vote is October 13th. So, I mean, we'll still have the next heat cab meeting, but it's a nice little reminder to put out even now. Roy, is there anything I'm missing for servicing lips?
I would say one thing we want to talk about is community voter education. Right now, we're having a problem with mail-in voting. People are concerned about standing in line because of their health, because of the pandemic. And people are also concerned about whether the post office will deliver their ballot to Wyandotte County Election Office in time to be counted. And we're working on something that we would expect to send to our community partners so they can help us get the word out that if you're going to do mail-in voting, you need to do that as soon as you can. You can apply for an AV1 right now. And I've already applied and I already have an answer back that our system was acceptable. But one of the things you need to know when they send out my ballot, they're supposed to send it out 20 days before the election. If, however, they send it out and I get that ballot 10 days late because of shenanigans with the post office, instead of sending that ballot in by mail, people will have to consider whether they want to walk that ballot in or not. And the document that we'll send our community partners will share that. That's all I have. Thank you.
And Dustin, correct me if I'm wrong. I do believe they're setting up, I'm forgetting the proper word for it, but it's
Dropbox.
Dropbox, that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know there's going to be one at least in at the election office, and I think they're considering putting another one elsewhere. Am I misspeaking there?
I do not know. Definitely at the election office. I'm not sure on the other one.
Okay.
I was only aware of the election office as well.
Okay. Then I may be imagining stuff. If there's another location, we'll be sure to share it. Broderick, do you want to go with pop-up testing for September?
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. So before I go there, I actually want to add another point to the servicing lips group, and that is there are several people who received an envelope similar to this that talks about them getting advanced ballots. And in my case, I received 2 of these. So that alone is creating questions as to it relates to who is sending appropriate information, although the address for where this is to be sent to is the election commissioner. The party that's sending this is not necessarily from Wyandotte County. And so that has caused some consternation with some of our resident voters as to, one, should I fill this out? If I get it twice, should I send it out twice? Et cetera. So no, there's as Roy mentioned, there's already shenanigans occurring. I will also mention that there are several groups engaged in making sure that we get the vote out. Roy recently presented to the Health Equity Task Force, which I can give a presentation on that group later, but Roy did an excellent job along with 2 others about the importance of voting and the necessity for everyone to vote. Also census. I've also been working with Rachel and several other groups about connecting individuals and organizations together to make sure that we have not splintered efforts, but a collaborative effort to make sure that we're providing the resources and support for individuals to get out to vote. Just as Roy has mentioned, you know, we have a lot of folks that are disabled. You know, who knows what the weather is going to look like in November. And so how are we properly planning to make sure that we're able to get folks and votes counted in a way that's equitable? So there's a lot of efforts going on to make sure that we're able to accomplish that. Certainly there will be more information provided as we continue. Even something as simple as providing voter registration, which Dustin was willing to come out for a drive-in service at my church, at New Bethel Church, and was able to, I can't remember, Dustin, how many folks that came into the area that we had you socially distancing just to get registered and just to do the census. So
we registered 20 voters and got 17 people completed with the census.
There you go.
One morning in an hour and a half.
Yes. So things like that is critical. It's critical. And so we're looking at how do we duplicate those efforts across our county, across the metro area. So not just at New Bethel Church, but every place that people gather, how can we provide a space for someone from our team to be there to do just what Dustin was able to do. So we're really being very intentional and trying to be very creative in how we're doing that. Ricardo, what did you ask me to talk about?
Pop-up testing.
So pop-up testing is continuing. Again, Rachel and I both served on different committees within the Health Equity Task Force. I will say the thing that is most disheartening is right now numbers are down, meaning the number of people going to get tested is down, but the positivity rate is still high. And as I shared with Dr. Greiner and Corvo, right now there is a huge discussion, and Jonathan probably may be a little bit aware of this. There's a huge discussion as it relates to sports and whether or not in our greater metropolitan area, we should allow sports. And I gave them, and some of you all may be may track the news better than I, because I'm not one to normally watch the news. But when you have Lathrop, Missouri, when you have Excelsior Springs, when you have cities, we now have 4 cities, if you guys aren't aware of it. There are 4 cities with sports teams because those 4 cities chose to play sports that are now either quarantined or just coming out of quarantine. And the individuals that were positive were coaches and players. And so now, simply for them, and this is just one game is in 4 cities, so 2 cities, per game. You have 4 areas now that have been quarantined, and we still don't understand why the need for us not to do sports. I won't get on that soapbox, but just know that we still are having conversations about economics over health. and I don't think there's a clear understanding that health will impact economics. Because if everybody's sick, we're not going to do anything. And again, not trying to play politics, health matters.
All right. Census. I can start it, and then Kim, or if anyone else has anything to add, that'd be great. But as of earlier today, the self-response rate at Wyandotte County is 59.7%. Unfortunately, I cannot see the data of how much that response rate has been raised because of the door-to-door stuff. So, but Kansas apparently is in the top 5 states that have answered the census with, like, I think a mid-90s percentage. So I'm not sure, but I know for sure self-response rates in Wyandotte County is 59.7%, and I don't know how much higher from that it has gone up because of the door-to-door stuff. Kim or anyone else can elaborate more?
I was told today that we were at 60% complete for door-to-door for our zone, for zone 4. But I know zone 4 includes part of Overland Park, but it includes all of Wyandotte County. But we're at 60% as of today.
What is the national average?
I don't know what the national average is. I just know that we're at 60% and we're 10 points behind Wichita.
Okay. Mutual aid updates?
The national response rate is 62.1.
So,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Mutual aid. Yeah, so piggybacking off the census, yes, Wyandotte County is at right around 60%, but the Northeast is much, much, much lower than that. And so something that has been, that's really struck me lately is how much effort we've put into communicating the census over the last 18 months or so. And yet still like 60% of the Northeast hasn't gotten that message somehow. Just shows me that we have no communication with much of our population, which is something that Kim and I are really trying to work on. And so we have been trying to organize some of the most economically vulnerable people in the county. And in doing that, right now we have 2 major issues that we're focused on today. So mutual aid was about responding to emergencies that people are having. One of the issues that we need everybody's help with is they have removed 4 of the park benches from the bus stop at 7th and Minnesota. So what that means is Wyandotte County doesn't have a single homeless shelter, despite having somewhere in the ballpark of 100 unsheltered people. So when residents lose their housing, they literally have no place to go. And instead of trying to address the problem, the city has instead taken the action to remove park benches so that to deter folks from hanging out downtown, despite not having any place else to go. So we need help raising awareness of that issue, of our homeless issue, generally speaking, but also of getting those park benches restored. Secondly, we have a current emergency. We have an unsheltered man who had a job lined up, but the position hasn't come through for him yet, and he has no money at all. And so we're trying to help him out. He said he needs about $300 to get through the next 2 weeks. We've posted that on the Wyco Mutual Aid Facebook page. And, if 15 people donated $20, that would be $300. So promote that, tell friends, family, if you know people who have money, maybe somebody can donate $50. But those are the couple current issues that I can think of. Kim, do you have anything?
If I could I also share for the benefit of the group? So when Dustin is talking about park benches being removed from 7th and Minnesota, many of you know I live a block away from there. And what has happened is, so now where typically the homeless folks would sleep and shelter on the park benches, they have now moved from the park benches to the bus shelters. So if someone has to catch a bus at 6 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning to get to work, there's now typically someone sleeping there as their home. And as any of us, if someone invades where I'm sleeping and I don't know who you are, that's conflict. So what it has now done by removing those benches is accelerated the amount of conflict and violence that now happens around the 4-block radius of 7th and Minnesota. So that is huge. Literally, I mean, like I said, I'm a block away, and literally now there is so much more violent interactions that have occurred because of those park benches being removed, literally right across the street from the police station, simply because the city chose to move those park benches.
So that's
Yes. Yes, it's something needs to be done about that. Dustin, Kim, anything else?
Would be a great time to call your local commissioner or mayor and talk about putting those park benches back in. I know, and Dustin and Kim, you guys can weigh in. I know there's been some communication, and there's sort of an additional call to action to begin to think about other potential ways to support the broader community with regards to what's happening down in that area, that benefit the unsheltered population, but also benefit other people, like reinstalling the electricity to the outlets that are in at the bus stop there. So there's some other things that can be done, but this is huge, and it might seem like a little thing, but it impacts not just those unsheltered folks, it impacts anybody who is navigating that space to and from buses, to and from business. It's a really simple win. I think it wouldn't take too much to get those benches back.
This is Eleanor. I think I got in on the tail end of that for a little bit. Is Wyandotte Behavioral Network involved in this in any way in restoring the benches?
Not to my knowledge, Miss Eleonora.
Okay. I know they had
and I agree with you, not just Wyandotte Behavioral Network, but specifically Alive and Thrive, which is specifically funded to look at mental health and how mental health is impacted positively or negatively in Wyandotte County. So yeah, we definitely need both of those networks engaged.
And the third thing, and maybe this was said, the NBR for the downtown shareholders. Jason Norberry is the executive director. I don't know if he is in the loop or where he stands on that, but I would think that he might also be maybe the third leg of some kind of support on that issue.
Jason's on the target list for conversation. I know, and Dustin, you can provide an update on conversations that have happened already. But this needs to be in response to concerns expressed by the bank.
Yes, so Security Bank contacted John Kelly, who is the director of facilities for the UG. And so John Kelly had those benches removed. He told me that he attempted to put them elsewhere downtown, but city administrator Doug Bach told him not to just remove them completely.
Why do they need to go elsewhere? They need to be by the bus stop. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And the benches Dustin is referring to are in the quote unquote Security Bank's area. So if you think about 7th and Minnesota, you got Security Bank, and you have that little park-like area that had 3 or 4 benches there for people to sit and relax. Well, they are now gone, and then there were 2 other benches across the street that were not necessarily at the bus stops, but in a loitering area, if you will, they have been removed. And so, yeah, so in essence, you're not welcome to park, sit, talk, loiter, hang out, fellowship in downtown Kansas City, Kansas, primarily because of security ban.
Correct. They also removed the trash cans from that area too.
Okay, this is Roy. I have a question for you, Roderick. I missed it. Why were they removed?
Because individuals, I won't call them all homeless, but individuals